So you've created your government to protect rights. How do you make it function? You create a list of all the acts of violation, such as rape, murder, theft, etc., define them as crimes. You outlaw them. And you create procedural laws for how to deal with those who commit them. Here is the part I find most interesting. If it's done well, the result is that the individual is then free to do anything he likes except that which is prohibited by law, and the government must do exactly and only that which is prescribed by law. You might want to stop and run that by again. With the proper laws in place, the individual can rest assured that his rights will be protected and never violated by government. Now, why call them laws instead of rules? Let's start with rules. You can create a business or a private club and establish any rules you like. You can say that employees, members, or customers are required to dress and behave in a particular way when on the premises and follow certain procedures. Anything peaceful you like. If someone disobeys a rule or an employee doesn't perform as agreed, you tell them it is time to part company. You settle up any club dues or salary that is owed one way or the other. Tell them to go away. Now, if they keep hanging around and perhaps break down the doors or climb in through a window, steal property or assault someone, you call the police, who physically capture them and lock them up. This part is done with laws. A law is a rule that sets down the procedure for identifying when a violation of rights has occurred and how to remedy it. It is a procedure for applying the use of retaliatory force. If the violation is severe enough, the law might have to call for lifetime imprisonment or even execution. Let's take a closer look at this. What should the law call for in each case? Well, we can start by looking at what the victim would need to do to defend himself or retaliate appropriately. Typically, there are injuries or property damages of some sort. You, the victim, would want to forcibly restrain the perpetrator for as long as necessary to take back the stolen property or extract payment for hospitalization or for damaged or destroyed property, and continue to restrain him for as long as you reasonably consider him a threat. Then, if the perpetrator can convince you that he's seen the error of his ways and promises to behave himself in a civilized manner in future, you let him go. Assuming he keeps his word, to restrain him further or make him pay more would be excessive force. If he commits another violation, you're naturally going to be more skeptical when he insists that he has reformed himself. So regardless of what he says, you keep him locked up for a longer period. If this goes on, it may reach the point where you have to keep him locked up indefinitely. Now, there are cases where the damaged cause is far greater than anything the perpetrator could pay back, even with help from friends, and even if he works it off over time. Sometimes you just have to accept the loss. Before we go on, let's consider what it means to lock someone up. You are essentially excluding him from civilization.
In the old days, this meant banishing him from the city. Ancient cities often had walls, not only to keep out foreign invaders, but to keep out their own criminals. This is a photo of York that I took in 1978. You can see the battlement on the left. Nowadays, instead of pushing him outside the city walls, we build a wall around him with maybe some cold, shark-infested waters. This is Alcatraz Island with the prison on it. I never could get a picture of it without phone lines in the way. The goal is the same, to keep the rest of us safe from him. But the advantage is that rather than leaving him free to roam the countryside and incarcerate ourselves in the cities, we incarcerate him and leave ourselves free.
Now let's consider bodily harm. When the perpetrator is intent on physically injuring or killing you, it is very often the case that the only way to stop him is to kill him first. If you can't stop him in time and you end up dead, the law must do what you would have done had you been able. That is, kill him, execute him. This is especially justifiable if he's considered a threat to imminent future victims. So the task of government is to do what the individual would do, but using overwhelming physical force under tightly controlled procedures. Can the individual contribute to this process? Well, provided that government has sufficient trained professionals available to handle the job, it's best for the untrained individual to stay out of the way. for his own safety and to avoid fouling up the procedures. If government needs his assistance, he can volunteer by serving as a deputy. Now the question is, what about the prisoner's rights? The first thing to remember is that by the very nature of things, rights can never be lost or taken away. As I frequently mention, they are requirements for survival. They are inalienable. Is it possible that the prisoner's rights are being violated? Not so long as force is used against him in defense and retaliation only. He took an action for which he had no right, and the victim is acting within his rights to defend himself and retaliate appropriately. When government is available, it does this on behalf of the victim. That is, the government is the servant of the individual. I'll mention at this point that you might hear it said that the individual delegates his right of self-defense to government. I prefer to be a little more specific about it. As I see it, it's not possible to delegate something that is inalienable. What the individual delegates to government is the task of assisting him with his inalienable right to self-defense. So back to the prisoner. The prisoner still has all the rights of man, and under a proper system his rights will not be violated. Instead, he is being treated by the rest of us in such a way as to recover stolen property, or its equivalent to the extent possible, pay for damages, etc., and as long as he is judged to be a threat to the rest of us, we prevent him from repeating the act, which we have every right to do. Now let's talk about the risk of human error. The best way to remedy a violation is for an impartial judge and jury to examine the evidence and come to a careful, reasoned decision. But mistakes can always be made. The wrong man can be caught and locked up or executed. If it's just a matter of letting an innocent man out of prison, well, he gets at least the remainder of his life back. But it isn't possible to bring a dead man back to life, and the argument can always be made that for this reason executions should be abolished. On the other hand, it can be argued that there are cases where you can be certain you've got the right man, and a public execution sends a strong message to others of his kind. It also allows his future victims to sleep at night without fear that he could escape or be let out too soon and come after them, or that he might find a way to pass information to the outside that will allow his henchmen to continue doing his evil deeds. Now let's take a look at the concept of punishment. An eye for an eye. Let's say that the perpetrator threw acid in the victim's face and blinded and disfigured him. Should the law call for the prisoner to be likewise blinded and disfigured by acid? An emotional response would be to say, yes, absolutely, the same horrible things he did should be done to him. If it means chopping off arms and legs, crippling, blinding, whipping, burning, poisoning, back-breaking, forced labor, then so be it. But the argument can always be made that such damage is permanent, and if you later discover that you have crippled an innocent man, it cannot be undone. Far better to simply keep him safely locked up. At least then, if you determine that he is innocent, you can let him go unharmed. This raises another question. We typically think of a jail cell as a small concrete room, perhaps with a barred window, nothing more expensive than what is necessary to keep him contained. But supposing the prisoner has sufficient resources to maintain a luxurious life, does it matter if he's incarcerated in a private mansion with the finest food and entertainment, servants to bring him whatever he wishes? After all, the essential thing is that he has been removed from civilization for as long as he represents a threat. Do we really care about anything beyond that? Just something to think about. Next question. This is a difficult one. Can you ever be certain that a prisoner has reformed himself and is no longer a threat? I don't think you can ever be certain. That's why you have a parole system. When you think the risk is minimal, you release him gradually. You keep a close eye on him, and if he shows any sign at all of going back to his criminal ways, you scoop him up and lock him away again. I want to finish on a positive note. Honesty is the natural state of a civilization. Wealth is created through honest trade. For example, two men arrive at a market. One man brings a sack of potatoes and the other man brings a basket of fish. They each recognize that they would be better off with a share of the other one's goods, and they agree to a trade. Each man is wealthier after the trade than before. Wealth has been created. Evil, on the other hand, is impotent. A man who steals is not a producer of wealth, but only a consumer of wealth. If a whole village of men do nothing but steal and consume, before long they will have consumed everything and they will be poor. To be wealthy, you must produce, and keep producing, at the same or higher rate than your consumption. Evil men don't produce, they only steal and consume. They are parasites. Evil men can exist only so long as the producers will tolerate their acts of theft and destruction. What I hope you got from this video is that rights cannot be created or handed out to us by law. On the contrary, rights, each individual man's requirement for the freedom to act on his own judgment for his own survival, must first be recognized. Then the laws must be written and enforced to protect those rights from violation. This is why an orderly, smoothly functioning government, equipped with overwhelming physical force and strictly limited to the protection of rights, is an essential component of an advanced civilization.